Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson, and today we have someone who's been around in the FOSS space for how many years has it been?
Oh gosh, I didn't know I would have to do math.
What year?
Well,
We can skip the math.
yeah, since the '90s, mid '90s.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you may know him from his Slackware stuff, uh, now being at Red Hat, being involved in Fedora stuff. Welcome to the show, Dave Cantrell. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I wasn't aware of your work. One of my viewers had sent the interview you did with Stuart over on Slackware Linux ARM, and I thought it was a good episode. And now you're here.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So, for anyone who's unaware of who you are and what you do, I guess, do you want to just start all the way back at the start? That seems like the best place to go.
Yeah, it's really a common question I get, how did I get started in this space? Because I think definitely the stories that people have now about how, their first, usage of open source software or Linux specifically is very different than mine. So I enjoy sharing that. So I will say back in the '90s, so I was in high school in the early '90s and was definitely interested in computers, and the computers that were available to me. Also, I'll say we didn't have a computer at home until I was in high school, and that was what was common at the time. Was your parent would bring home an old computer from work, so you were getting something outdated, but it didn't matter. You had one at home. Most of the modern stuff I was using at the time was at school, and that was dominated by Apple, and then IBM later came in and sort of inserted PCs from various generations. So that was my exposure. I had heard of other stuff. I knew that there was large computers. Companies had mainframes, things like that, but I had never seen one or really used it or anything like that. So we my friends and I, we would get into programming and stuff, and we had most of the information you would get would be through just talking to people, going to bookstores and the library and finding books and kind of going from there. Books back then were kind of a key source to learn a lot of this stuff initially, because unlike people at a university or a company, you didn't really have reliable internet connectivity at home.
Right, and if you
Most
did
people at
have
that
an
point.
internet connection, what information was there really available at the time?
Exactly. Yeah. At that point in time, most of the, I would say, technical stuff would be on Usenet, which, dial-up home users weren't really exposed to. And even then, you kind of had to be a technical user to get into that. So in high school, I remember someone had heard about Unix, and then that led to I already knew about that, but I was like, yeah, but that requires really expensive hardware. We don't have any of that. And then someone said, no. I meant to say, he said Linux, because no one knew how to pronounce it at that
Right,
point.
right.
And so it's like, okay, I'm curious, what is this? So we head to the bookstore, and we see a lot of books that are talking about this, and we have no idea of where to start. Like, what, we didn't even know what it was,
Roughly
right? So
what year would this have been in?
for me, that was 95, 96,
So
I
about
think.
2, 3 years after Slackware and Debian started?
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, uh publishing these releases along with a how-to book was kind of the norm. And there was interest among publishers to do that. So that's kind of the, aside from being able to download it again, that was a thing that people at universities could do. I wasn't there yet, so it was like that, I'm getting it from a book, and the book would, they were trying to put together these books, which is how to get it set up initially. So we went through that, and I remember the three friends that I was working with, we each spent about a week trying to get our Linux set up on our system, and I was the only one that succeeded. But even with that, I didn't have dial-up support, and I didn't have sound support, and I didn't have X, but it did boot, and I was able to log in. And
That's
so,
something.
you got to start somewhere. So that was sort of the beginnings of it. And then I went to university, and my degree is in computer science. So Unix was the norm at that point. We were doing everything on Solaris, which I had already also been exposed to in high school. And so I was, and playing around with Linux, there were similarities. So everyone, was starting to put Linux on their computers. I already had that. It was sort of this halfway install, but suddenly I had access to all these people that could help me, how do I get X working? And, you just start sharing that knowledge, and pretty soon I'm just using it full time. And then you start finding, well, we'll say finding bugs or problems or something like that. And all of the notices, all the documentation, every developer is putting their email address in there. I have email now at the university, so I email people and say, hey, I found this. Sometimes I would be able to fix it. Other times it would just be, I want to let you know. And that's how I got to first talk with Pat Volkering, and then ended up meeting him in person at a trade show in Chicago. So in the US, they may have been worldwide, but we used to have these trade shows called Comdex, later Comdex Windows World. It's just a typical industry trade show. And he was there with Slackware CD sets. And, we were like, oh my gosh, this is what we're using. So that sort of started things off, and we continued talking, and that led to my involvement with Slackware. That was around, what release was that? I think it was release 3.3 maybe.
Yeah, according to the wiki page, you were part of the team as of 4. So sometime before that point.
Yeah, well, so I was around for 3.6 definitely, and 3.5 and 3.4, but I don't know that I know my name wasn't in the the announced file, but we were helping. I was going to trade shows along with Patrick at that point while I was still in university, and then that led to a job offer from the publisher of Slackware, Walnut Creek CD-ROM. Long since gone at this point, but if you were around in the 90s, you were on a modem probably, and downloading lots of data was time consuming, prone to error, and probably expensive. So it was really common to have these companies that were pressing CDs of just really anything you could download. And so Walnut Creek CD-ROM was a company that was doing that. You could buy CDs of fonts and clip art and icons, and then they had Linux distributions, and they also did FreeBSD. They were the official publisher for that, and so that's why I was employed by them, as that was kind of like the home base really for Slackware at that time. And yeah, then was kind of involved in through, I think, release 7.1, and then that was early 2000s. So we had the .com fallout, and that led to, so Walnut Creek had already been through a number of acquisitions and mergers, and it was kind of a disorganized mess, in my opinion. We had a hardware company that either bought us or we bought them or we merged with them. I don't quite understand. BSDI did come in and acquire us. That was a
Right.
commercial business selling commercial BSD Unix. And they were. I look back at that now, and that was definitely a cash grab with the .com wave, and it just didn't pan out. So we were let go because as it was getting parted out, the engineering assets, as they call it. Let me see if I can remember this meeting. The engineering assets were going to Wind River, but they only wanted the BSD side of the house. So that left those of us working on Slackware, we were let go. And that was kind of the end of getting a paycheck to work on Slackware, though the distribution obviously is open and it continued. Pat did ask me to continue working on it, but I was concerned about, now I'm no longer employed. I left university to do this.
Now I'm you didn't end up
worried.
finishing it.
Well, I after that I ended up going back to university to finish my degree. So I left like midway through. No regrets with any of the decisions. It's just I guess I wish I could have continued working on Slackware, but it was probably the right decision to just focus on school and get that finished, and then go from there. But yeah, I know I'm going through the whole story here. Let's see. So
it's all good. We can jump back at any point. It's totally fine.
Yeah. But so after I graduated with a degree, I worked on a number of companies before ultimately ending up at Red Hat in 2005, and I've been there ever since. And I work on I'm in engineering, and I work on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Fedora Linux, and now CentOS Stream. So basically, the operating system products that Red Hat does, that's where I am. I've seen the company grow quite a bit since I've been there. It's definitely got a different feel than when I started, but we're still open source first, and it's really nice that you can, like, I've been able at least to carve out a career around being able to get paid to work on open source software. And this is a concept that decades and decades ago wouldn't have made sense to any company. And I think that all of the players out there, companies that have supported Linux in particular, but really all open source development, has fundamentally changed the computing industry. And that it's kind of fun to be part of that. One thing I didn't expect at this point in time was that, kind of like the number one Linux platform is probably an Android phone. And no one really knows, it's Android, it's not Linux. And when I got involved with this, the sort of the dream was, what if you didn't have to use a Windows PC? What if Linux was good enough to replace that? We don't really need that anymore. Like it's found its home elsewhere, and it's it's on like TVs and every embedded device.
You have the Android Auto as well.
Right. Yeah. Of course. So like it's everywhere, and it's running. RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is everywhere. It seems, and if it's not that, then it's another Linux distribution. Gone are the days of having a wide range of commercial Unix operating systems and Windows. Sure, those are still out there, but they're not like at that number one position anymore. Right. So that's kind of neat. But I feel like I'm trailing off here in my thoughts.
It's so good. I'm forgetting the timeline on Red Hat. 2005, you said you joined, yes?
Yes.
Was it Red Hat Linux, but still at that point, or was Fedora Core?
It was Fedora Core.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that split happened. I'm gonna get the date wrong, but it was a couple of years before I joined. Where Red Hat Linux, what had been Red Hat Linux, basically became Fedora Core, and a new commercial supported version of the distribution was rebranded as actually Red Hat Advanced Server, RHAS.
Final release of Red Hat Linux was March 31st, 2003.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, and then and really the code base just kind of for the distribution just kept continuing. But so the idea was the business model will be, we're going to make a commercial product that's based on the open source distribution that's free to everyone, and we're going to sell support and subscription services. And you know what, like that, I got to give it to Red Hat for figuring out how to carve out a revenue stream and letting us basically do all of our work in the open. Like I've never had to keep like code behind closed doors or anything like that. Now, I'm sure that we do have products that are like that, but at least working on the distribution, the expectation at Red Hat is you're doing this in the open first. And I've tried to explain it to people that because of that, and it's so ingrained in how we do the OS at Red Hat, we don't really have a way to make and ship something proprietary. Like we don't even have a process or mechanism for that. We don't know how to do it, which is kind of cool, but so the expectation is you're doing everything in the open, and and then we stabilize it and support it forever. We're still supporting, like the promise for RHEL for businesses was 10 years of support, but businesses pay for additional years. So they're still, like I'm sure like RHEL version 6 and version 5 has users and they're paying us to continue supporting that. And I think that says something to the stability of the platform and the reliability. And that is, that definitely goes to all of the open source developers that, those of us at Red Hat and plus everyone else. Like, I mean, Linux is a really solid OS. It's really reliable.
Yeah, I've got the support page open right now. End of maintenance, we have 7 and 6. They're in the extended life phase now.
That's right. Yeah, that's what we call it. Well, that basically means the type of updates. I think it goes to critical and security. Okay. But you have to pay for those additional updates.
Right. That makes sense.
I don't want to sound like a Red Hat salesperson here. I guess I'm just explaining how we do things. I try to clarify, like, the stuff that appears in RHEL it's in Fedora years before that. So, but Fedora itself is not just a test bed or dumping ground for things. Like we actually do test and make releases and all that kind of stuff. There are vendors out there that also, just like you can get with Ubuntu, you can get systems pre-installed with Fedora. So that's kind of cool.
And just for context, like how old RHEL 6 is, that is from 2010.
Yeah. It's I worked on that one. The first RHEL that I had patches that went into was a version of RHEL 3. I forget which one. So I've been there for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we're working on 11. I don't even know anymore. It's just all. But all of us that work on development stuff at Red Hat, we all use Fedora. So that's the development platform, which is, I wouldn't want to use RHEL. I mean, I know that businesses buy it, but I wouldn't want to use that as my daily driver. Right. It's missing a few things I like.
Right. It's an enterprise product. It's not
right.
Yeah. You don't need to say anything that's going to get you in trouble.
Yeah,
It has a function that is not for
Yeah.
the general general purpose user. It's a business focused operating system.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 I hope they're not listening. I don't want to badmouth the product, but yeah, it's it seems to work. So the model does anyway.
So jumping all the way back, when you first got started with Linux, was that first distro you used Slackware?
It was.
It
yes.
was. And what hardware were you using at the time? Just so we'll have an idea of like what kind of things, how much things have improved really.
Yeah. Okay. So that was a system that I had put together from sort of cast off parts. It had, and I got to look up the processor real quick.
Okay.
Hang on just a sec here.
All good, all good.
Yeah, the okay, so I don't know if you remember a microprocessor company called Cyrix.
Cyrix. See, I'm 28, so
sure. Yeah, yeah. So I'll explain Cyrix.
Sure. Okay.
But yeah. So Intel processors, x86 processors were. I'll clarify. So okay. I started on x86. I know that there were other architectures that were supported, but that was definitely the easiest one to get going. Slackware was only on x86. So I had an x86 system that was using a Cyrix 486 DLC microprocessor. That was, I think it was 20 or 25 megahertz. It had 4 megabytes of RAM. I had a 105 megabyte hard drive. I did not have a CD-ROM drive. And I did not have a 3.5 inch floppy drive. I only had a 5.25 inch floppy drive. Again, assembled from parts. And I had a Paradise VGA graphics adapter, which could do 16 colors at 640 by 480.
See if we can find it. VGA. Maybe I'll be able to find a picture. Surely you'll find something. Paradise Systems. What a crusty board that is.
It's yeah. So this is what we would do. We would assemble, systems from parts, and try to it was, and I was doing this because this was not my daily driver system. It was one that I wanted to see if I could get Linux on. So, I didn't have money to go and purchase a new system. This was when computers were still several $1,000s in the US, new. So you're getting parts, and businesses, especially like in high school, I was making money by, helping small businesses, like, here, upgrade Windows on our computer, or help me hook up this printer, or, and you would get a little cash here and there, and then you could go and purchase parts like from generic vendors. So it'd be usually like it was all import stuff, and it would be like in a office park building, and it would be a windowless door, and it would just say like the guy's initials, like HL Computers or something, and you would go in and it would just be all these like just brandless boxes, and it would be like, oh, you need a VGA card, there it is, it's $20, and and so it's just cheap stuff, but it did run Linux, so I used the term run loosely. It was actually faster than Windows on that computer, which you can probably not be surprised by. But yeah, so Cyrix was a x86 compatible CPU manufacturer. They were fabless. I think IBM made the made the processors, but
yes,
there were a
IBM was a
number.
foundry partner. Yes.
Yeah, so they were founded to basically try to make a low cost x86 knockoff, and there were a number of vendors, a number of companies that were doing this, because Intel processors at that time were quite expensive, but they were reliable, they performed well, but I did not have like $400 or $500 to buy a 486, like a genuine 486. So I went with the knockoff. Now, there were a lot of Linux kernel developers that had these sort of low cost CPUs. So there were plenty of workarounds in the kernel to deal with these sort of misbehaving processors.
Right, they were clones, but not perfect clones.
Not perfect clones.
Right.
They, to make it cheaper, they would say, let's just leave out some instructions. Cyrix was definitely the big thing they saved money on was just not having an FPU. So it was I mean it got me to my next computer. So but yeah, that's definitely a far cry from the kind of systems that we have these days. But yeah, that was the first system I installed on.
Even the cheapest of cheap devices just completely outclass something like that today. Just like a basic phone completely outclasses that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's and when I talk to people about, like, well, you got it installed on that, but then how long did it take to compile things? And the answer is it took a long time. You would do a lot of waiting, and in that time you would either be reading through the books you had, or doing something else, like because you had to like let the computer finish. And we're now like, I don't know how fast my system can build the kernel now, but it's minutes, if that. And this used to be an all day affair. Oh, I gotta recompile the kernel. Okay, well, here we go. And then you would get the infamous GCC signal 11 errors, which were due to cheap hardware. It was bad memory. It was so common that there was the famous SIG 11 FAQ, which, let's see if that's still online.
There's got to be. If it's not, there'll be an archive of it, surely.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's on the Linux documentation project. I just typed in
the SIG 11 problem.
SIG 11 problem, and then there's the SIG 11 FAQ.
Yep.
So
question SIG 11. What does that mean? Answer: Signal 11, or officially known as segmentation. Officially known as segmentation fault, means the program acts as a memory location that was not assigned. That's usually a bug in the program, so if you're writing your program, that's usually most likely because, however, this FAQ will concentrate on the possibility beside that. Okay, so how long is this document?
Oh, it's quite long, and it's full of just anecdotal feedback from people. But no, like SIG 11 is real, and we do debug memory problems. But what would happen is you would get this error building the kernel, and you would think like, okay, well, surely someone built the kernel before releasing it. I mean, Linus wouldn't release it if it didn't work. So what am I doing wrong on my end? So people would get online and they would start asking questions, and pretty soon in those conversations, someone would say, have you read the SIG 11 FAQ? Because you probably have bad memory, or something is wrong with your hardware. And that was really common. It was just really bad components, and running GCC, building the kernel, building GCC itself, any of those really, really large programs that took a long time to compile would tax systems like I just described, and would really push them to their limits. You might not normally see that had you been running DOS or even Windows, because they are not stressing the system like you are under Linux. But yeah, so that's sort of a thing of the past. We don't have to have the the FAQ explaining that your hardware is terrible.
Mm.
But yeah.
Considering those issues of the past, I can understand why when Linus had his new system built by Linus Tech Tips, the other Linus, the Canadian Linus,
Yes.
made a big deal about having a full ECC system. Like, I can
Absolutely.
understand now why that was such a big deal considering that legacy.
Yeah. You can't and he is definitely stressing his system constantly. And you don't cheap out on the components, but you pay more for the really reliable stuff. And that's also reflected in the cost of enterprise grade hardware that is on all the time. Consumer grade hardware, which Linux developers, those of us at home, we don't turn our systems off. We're stressing, we're always doing stuff, and we see those consumer products or consumer rated gear tends to fail faster. It was really a major problem back when we all used hard disks, because those were mechanical and they just couldn't, they weren't rated for the hours we were giving them, but no one could afford an enterprise grade disk. So, and there were workaround solutions for that too. Like I look at RAID solutions as like dealing with the fact that the hardware will fail, so you might as well prepare for it. And we have like software RAID in Linux was done for that reason. I remember Alan Cox, he was describing a setup one time where when he was doing bring up on a new system or really working on something that was barely running the kernel, and it's you're getting kernel panics constantly, he would just NFS mount all of the stuff on the system because he knew it would crash. And it's like, I can't also deal with local data loss, so all the data is over the network. That's how he did it, which kind of makes sense. Of course, you have to have networking available on the system at that point. But once we gained NFS support, that was possible.
So you mentioned that. So I'm going to jump back through your story. I think it's what we're going to do for like half this episode. You mentioned struggling.
I'm all over the place.
No, totally fine. I like these episodes. These are good ones where I don't have to talk as much. So you mentioned struggling to get X set up. And I think people now sort of take for granted, I guess, the simplicity not only of setting up X, but setting up everything with their system. And, you can just install a package, and for the most part, it's probably going to be fine. If it's not fine, you're probably missing a package. And even just using X itself, things like Xrender, for example, those didn't exist yet. So if you wanted, my understanding is you wanted to reconfigure your monitor layout, you had to restart the X server.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it was so back then X. So you had the driver for the graphics device, which was early on. We actually had different executable X servers for different types of graphics adapters. Like you had the one for
lovely.
ATI, you had the one for Matrox, you had and then of course there was a generic one. So but all those eventually got separated out into drivers that were then loaded by the X server. But the sort of one of the rites of passage, so to speak, was getting X working and configuring your display, which everyone had. So I described how I would go and buy these parts. They're generic, no brand or anything like that. That's where my monitor came from as well. X did not know about that monitor. It didn't really know about anything except maybe like a dozen monitors that no one had anyway. So you had to write mode lines in your XF86 config file, and the X server will do what you tell it to do. So you would write a mode line, and you had to get the refresh rate, and you had to calculate all of this stuff for your monitor using the information from the manufacturer, and that might not be correct. You may have gotten a manual with the monitor, but it could have been the wrong one. So you would put all this info in, and then fire it up. I hope you got it right, but some unfortunate people would smoke their monitor.
I was about to mention, my understanding is you could pop some bad monitors.
Yeah, and that was, that would certainly turn people off from using Linux, because now they've been told to try this, and now it has damaged their hardware beyond repair. But it was it was tough, and it was just one of those things that you had to learn about. Now, you on a PC, you would take an operating system like Windows. Part of what Microsoft would do for that product is they would just have a database of pretty much every manufacturer in existence and have a way to automatically figure that out based on detecting it. And there were at that point in time, there were no real standards for getting that info. But so they would research it, and they would build that into the OS. So that was where that sort of ease of use argument would come in, where it's like, well, Linux is hard to use because I have to give it all this info. It's like, well, yeah, right now it is, because we don't have all that info. But we got to a better place within Linux, certainly with kernel mode setting for the display, and then the X server being able to just directly use that. And of course, Wayland has improved things even further for modern displays, because we don't really have, X was from a time period where we had CRTs. We didn't have LCD displays, and now you've got the ultra high def and all kinds of other displays that X wasn't really built for. Wayland is taking into account, well, maybe displays won't always look like this. Maybe, we should build in a way to improve that, and I think they've done that. I do still use X, and that's not because I'm anti Wayland. It's because I still use software that does not work in Wayland, even through the X layer, and I know it will eventually, but I just don't care. I'm going to use whichever one is the path of least resistance for the software that I use, and that's why I still have X as my my graphical setup.
What software do you have that's causing issues?
It's some maritime software that I use. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the problem, is like, it's just really very specific,
right.
low number of users, and not a lot of those users are developers. So it's one of those things where I fear that if I ever want to have that work on Wayland, I'm going to be the one that makes it work on Wayland. But so a lot of these specific programs for X that are very, maybe industry specific, relied on stuff that was in X that now in Wayland is sort of a different paradigm. So things like getting input devices, window management, things like that, just the whole paradigm's different in Wayland. So that's one of the limiting factors right now. So it's not just a matter of changing your include lines and recompiling against Wayland. You have to kind of re-architect your software around a new environment. You could probably think about it as like, I have this program on Mac OS or Windows, and I want it on X, and that's not a simple change. That's a new UI basically.
What desktop do you happen to be using right now?
The one I have been rocking for a few years now is XFCE.
Okay.
So shout out to XFCE. I've tried a lot of the other modern ones. I tend to do that maybe once a quarter. I should clarify, if anyone from XFCE is listening, please don't take that to say yours is not modern. I know it's modern. I keep it updated. But I really like the XFCD sort of simplicity paradigm and the panel at the bottom, and just it does what I want. And it stays out of the way.
Sure.
That's what I like. Before that, I was using GNOME 2, which we had in Fedora.
Wait, so you've been on that was a while ago. That was quite a while ago.
It was a while ago, yeah. But with GNOME 3, the change to GNOME 3, it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't really a simple upgrade. It was a total change of how you think about the environment, and I didn't really like that. I found it kind of jarring, and I felt I was less productive. So I was just like, I'm not really interested in this. I'll move along. But you know, we have plenty of environments out there, and they all do very different things, and you know, you can customize them the way you want. But yeah, I guess I have been on XFCE for a while.
Yeah, just a little bit, just like two GTK versions.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. What do you use?
Right now I'm on Neri, which is
okay.
Have you heard of Neri? It's a relatively new one, just a couple of years.
I have not. No.
It's not a tiling window manager. It's a scrolling window manager. So it uses the tiling concept where, you know, the window, you spawn a window, automatically goes into a tile, but you have this infinite horizontal plane that you can work with. So rather than having just your monitor, you can expand out past that point and then slide along like that plane, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. That sounds similar to just having virtual desktops.
Yeah, you have it. Yeah, you have the virtual desktops as well, but you can also just have all of those just on a single virtual desktop.
Yeah. That's an interesting paradigm. Do you find it productive, or do you find things getting lost?
I have certainly run into issues with things getting lost. You've got to be kind of how would you say it? Very not what's the word? I'm blanking on words right now. Planned. You got to really think about how you're using virtual desktops to keep things organized, basically. Otherwise, you can very easily get things very lost.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of a feature, well, or an anti-feature, depending on who you talk to. In older versions of X, like when I started, and we would have, you know, I had I think it was a 14-inch display. Sorry, that's I don't know. Do you use inches for display measurement? Yeah.
Pretty much the only thing we use inches for, just displays. That's it.
That's what I thought, because it's like the same marketing materials.
Yeah.
So okay, so you can imagine that one was small, and I'm guessing on the size. I can't really remember exactly, but it was small. And what was common at the time for X for Linux users is, okay, so you had 640 by 480 was your viewport, but you would actually configure the display to be 1280 by 1024. And what you would do is you could move all the way around, and so you had two dimensions to scroll instead of just the horizontal one you're talking about. Some people loved that, and I could not work within that sort of. I was like, no, I don't want it. And so that's where that virtual desktop came, where you would have a pager.
Yeah.
And it's like you could just, you know, you have 4.8 or something like that. That was a little easier to wrap my head around than having thinking about the display being physically larger in front of me, but my viewport was small. But yeah, some people would do that, and it was really weird to see them use their systems.
There actually have been some modern re-implementations of that have also added some tooling in to sort of make it somewhat more productive, adding things like a window overview so you can zoom out and then more easily find the windows.
I could see that.
It's not a
working.
model
Yeah.
I can kind of get behind, but I like that people are experimenting with different models. Even if it's a thing that nobody really cares about. I like that people are trying it out, see if it works. If it doesn't, hey, move on, do something else.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that I find this kind of stuff, it's always interesting. Like I don't spend a lot of time configuring my desktop, but I'm always curious if maybe there's one that I would like more. So, a couple times a year I probably fire up all the different ones that I can think of, and eventually I get tired of doing that, and I'll say like, okay, well, I looked at all of these, and I'm always curious what KDE is doing. I remember when that was announced initially,
The cool desktop environment.
Right. And I didn't know anything about Qt or Qt, as some people say.
I say both, just to annoy everyone.
So I tend to say Qt now to someone who doesn't know that's how it's pronounced, and then I'll say Qt to like KDE developers or like Qt developers who are, they're gonna get annoyed. I don't know. It's just like, it's kind of a bit of fun, and they're like, it's pronounced there. I'm like, yeah, I'm just messing with you. But yeah, I remember when that came out, and I remember the screenshots. I want to say it was, you can correct the date, I'm gonna guess 1997.
Initial release was 98.
Oh, okay. It must have been announced.
There was there was an announcement in 96. So could have been somewhere in that period. Maybe you saw the beta or something.
Yeah. And I thought the screenshots were really, really cool, because at that point, we had FVWM and sort of all of the fan outs from that, and you can have some really, really cool looking desktops. There used to be a website called themes.org, which was collecting all of these FVWM themes and later other window managers, and that went away. But it was that's how we would have these like really cool like setups like you would see in a movie or whatever, and people would spend days setting up the background graphics and patches to terminal programs and stuff, but you could get like a really, really slick setup, and then of course you would want people to see it, but it was before any of us had laptops, so you're like, hey, come over to my house and look at my desktop. But now you can do that on a laptop, and you get the person at the coffee shop or the airport sees it, and they're like, whoa, what are you running? Which I always think is kind of funny. What I like doing, especially going through an airport, is I like to take my laptop, and just for the travel day, I will run a theme that makes it look like Windows 95.
Okay.
Or
I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that one. I thought you were going to be like, oh, I like running something that looks like a hacker prompt. That's going to get stopped by the TSA.
Well, no. That's well, I do have a story about that, but I just always if I'm in an airport, I want someone to actually see that, or on an airplane, see like just do a double take and think, is this person really using Windows 95 this year? Like, and then they're curious what you're doing, and it's, I don't know, it's just kind of a fun little gag, but done that a few times. But I've definitely got some weird looks.
Regarding the KD1 thing, this is what I love about open source. There is a developer who decided, I'm going to go and revive KDE1. He decided to just go and fork the project.
Yeah.
Poured it over to Qt 2 because Qt 2 has a couple of nice additions to it, like some scroll wheel support, for example. This is what happens when you deal with 90s code base. You sort of, a lot of basic missing things are missing. And he wants to eventually basically do a rewrite of the backend and port it over to Wayland as well.
That would be, that would be really cool to see. Send me the URL for that if there is one, or wherever.
Yeah, I think he's got a repo. Let me see. Yeah. I'll email you a link afterwards. You can get it set up right now with the development preview in Debian if you want to. Actually, I can send in the chat here, can't I? Yes. How do I get the chat here? I don't even know. There it is. That's the chat. Okay. There you go.
Oh, libranext.com. Okay. That would be fun to see. You know, it's
really very buggy right now because it's
I'm
90s
sure, yeah.
code. But
yeah. Oh, I so remember this. Oh my gosh. That is, I definitely remember because when KDE came out, you know, at that point in time, anything that was new that was coming out and you were a Linux user, you were downloading source code and compiling it. So my friends and I, you know, we're like, let's build KDE, but it was all in C++, which G++ took even longer to crank through all the code on our slow systems. But yeah, we spent, I think it was like a week building all of the source packages for KDE 1, but it ran. It looks really slick. I thought it was pretty cool. But then GNOME was announced after that because
they're a year apart from each other.
Yeah, and what I remember from that is it was the pushback on using Qt.
Yeah, at the time it had the proprietary license. Yeah, it was
which yeah, I get, you know, that's you know, and they because GIMP was already out since the G in GTK stands for GIMP, though it probably stands for GTK toolkit now. But
yeah, I think it is just GTK at this point.
Yeah, but that's where it originated from, and they said, okay, well, we're going to do a desktop environment, and we're going to use these GPL libraries as the base, which, yeah, you know, it's kind of cool. And I mean, I think they're both really nice environments. I don't use them on a daily basis, so I don't know the warts and stuff that people run into from time to time. But they seem to both have, like, from my viewpoint, roughly similar sized user bases that are like deliberately I'm using this because I want to, not I'm using it because I installed a distribution and this was the default interface. Like I'm not counting those users.
Right. Well, a good example of that, just with Fedora, right, is last release before that, whatever release it was, promoting Fedora KDE to be alongside Fedora Workstation, where they're both right there on the homepage. You don't have to like dig through the spins to find it.
Yeah, and you know, that's nice. We had made that decision a while back, and also for I guess for the audience, because we didn't mention it at the beginning, I am on the Fedora Engineering Steering Committee. I'm also on the Fedora Council. I've been involved with Fedora for a very long time. We have the current stable release is Fedora Linux 43. And the first one that I had a hand in was Fedora Core, I think 3 or 4. So I've seen a lot of Fedora. But yeah, there was a push years back to say, you know, we want to promote, you know, kind of a primary experience for users. That's not to say that we were going to remove other desktop environments, but feedback we were getting from people that wanted to use Fedora who were not technical users, you know, they're not going to jump in and start building software and submitting patches. They just want to use a computer. They were confused. They're like, why is it asking me? I don't know what this means. Do you want GNOME or KDE or LXDE or XFCE? They're like, I don't know what any of this is. Why is like, and that's fair. So we rethought, like, how do we present these? But now you skip ahead, and on certain hardware, MacBooks, the anything that Asahi runs on, KDE tends to be a little farther ahead in terms of support on that hardware than GNOME does. Now, I haven't tried it in like a year, so that could be totally different. But I know that was a big push because people were coming into the project, joining the community. They would have a MacBook with one of the Apple M whatever processors, and they want to run Linux. And so that's Asahi Linux, which is part of Fedora now. And they would be surprised. They're like, I can't, it's only giving me KDE. Are we like really Fedora, or are we, what's going on here? So I think it was okay what we did, promoting that, because, there's no reason that people shouldn't use it. So it was. Now the other ones, like, we haven't received really any requests to say promote XFCE to that level, but I don't think those users are really in the same category as am I on GNOME or KDE. I think it's, somehow it's different.
Well, I think specifically with XFCE, I think first point of order is getting their Wayland version ready. Like,
yep,
they are working on that. That is something that is coming, but if we're talking about, like, what is... And Fedora's always been this distro which jumps ahead and does things. I would argue a little bit too early in some cases. Like, when Fedora enabled Wayland by default, I want to say it was 2013, some really early year.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. Sometimes this stuff is too early. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's all good. It's good. With a distro that sort of has that, like, legacy of wanting to push forward modern technology, making a distro which making a desktop that only has the X11 version ready, put alongside like GNOME and KDE, it doesn't really fit with sort of what the distro is trying to do at this point.
Absolutely, yeah, and it adds a lot to the testing matrix and sort of, what has to be ready to actually, call it the release. And so, yeah, the work builds up that way.
Right. And if you're gonna have an X version, then X has to be a blocking problem. And with GNOME and KDE dropping the X11 versions,
yeah,
I've spoken to a number of Fedora people that do not want to deal with X11 at this point. Are very happy to just not have that be a blocking problem anymore.
Yeah, no, and it's so definitely Wayland by default was not without controversy or pushback, but I will say that doing that in Fedora does allow us to really take those new technologies and iron them out. So maybe make a default in whatever release, and then that bakes for several releases, and then it's really just solid. And we've done that for a number of things, and a lot of upstream developers on these things on various projects are also working on Fedora, so it's kind of a natural fit to do it there, I think.
I was a little bit early. It was 2016 that it was made default for GNOME.
That sounds right.
Yeah, Fedora 21, so that would have been 2014, something like that. It was introduced.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That sounds right. I can't remember.
Yeah. This is just what I'm seeing in the AI overview that shows up on the search engine. It could be wrong. I don't know. That sounds somewhat right though.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
So, you've been jumping around. I've been jumping around. We've been this is great. I brought you on to talk about sort of Slackware and Linux history, and then we've been talking about Fedora for the past like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
No, I like it. It's fun. You got a lot to say.
I do. Yeah. Excuse me. If this ends up being not usable, I'm happy to do a more organized session. But yeah, so yeah, I know you had questions about Slackware, and I think the last thing we talked about was X, which took us down that
Yeah.
that
Yeah, somehow we got there. So when you got started, my understanding is Slackware didn't yet have a web presence beside like the FTP server.
Correct. Yeah. So sort of one thing that, and I don't remember the exact conversation with Patrick, but we were interested, a couple of us at university were interested in providing. We're like, well, a lot of projects have a website. We could put one together for the project.
It's kind of weird that's even a thought, right? Because now that's just the default thing you do. If you have even if it's not like a complete product, it's just make a website, buy a URL, just throw it up there.
Yeah, and we put together a website. He liked it and wanted to go forth with it. So that's how Slackware got its web presence, was us sort of saying, hey, can we do this? And then we did. And because he already had slackware.com. He had the domain name. And then we set up a server and put it on there. And we did several iterations of the site. Everything was, I will say that was slackware.com. Working on that website was the last time I really did any web thing. Not really a web guy myself. I'm not, but it sort of brought me into the Slackware fold where I could start working on other stuff. But the site was, it was HTML written by hand. And later we used PHP, which was new at that point, PHP version 2. And we could do a little more dynamic content. All of the graphics were done by us in the GIMP, what few or what little graphics there are. And then the biggest thing I think we added in 2000 was the online discussion forums that we put on the website. And those got to be really popular because at that point we didn't have like a discussion mailing list for the project. What we monitored mostly were Usenet postings, which was really just a subset of users, and not everyone knew how to get into that. And then there were also IRC channels, which we didn't really go into those. Those were just community members. So we're like, it'd be nice to have a discussion forum because, people are asking us the same question. Why don't we put it here? And we found this guy had written an open source sort of discussion board software called Forum, PHORUM. And it was written in PHP, so it was a nice thing that we could integrate into the site. And at one point, the author of that software came out to California for something and wanted to meet us. He's like, yeah, you're one of the biggest users of my software, and just wanted to thank you. And we would provide him feedback and patches here and there. I wrote an import tool when he re-architected a bunch of stuff, and we had to extract all of the discussion like threads and then re-import them into a new database because it was not compatible. And so I wrote a tool to do that, and I was like, hey, someone else might want this. And he said, no, probably not, but I'll take it anyway. Yeah, he was nice. And yeah, it kept running after all of us left, but I don't think it's on the website anymore. I don't think
I couldn't see a link to it. It seemed like it is gone. Regarding Forum, their latest version was from 6 years ago, so it seems like the project is dead at this point.
Yeah, that would be my guess. Started in 1998. I feel like this is software that served a purpose at the time, but
right.
is no longer really. I wouldn't. I don't think I would use it now to set up a discussion board.
Mhm.
But and not because it's bad, just because there's not really a need for that
Sure.
anymore.
Yeah.
We've got other solutions, and also most like it's so easy now to get an open source project like from the ground up. You could go to GitHub and you suddenly have a way for people to have discussions. You have ways for people to send you patches. You have ways for people to open issues. You have a wiki where you can add user contributed documents. All that stuff that large projects have, but took time to set up. And the vast majority back in the 90s, the vast majority of open source scratch and itch type software that you would find would just be dumped on an FTP site, and because that's all the developer. It's like, I want to put it out there, but I'm not going to make this a huge project. So you would go digging in FTP sites to find stuff. And now I think GitHub, Codeberg certainly, and GitLab maybe to a lesser extent, they have these nice environments for that. And the idea is not really new. Like I don't know if you remember SourceForge. So that came out of a company that had started as VA Research, which made Linux workstations, like custom built, and then that became VA Linux. And then they created SourceForge.net, which was an early sort of thing like GitHub. This is before Git existed. And I don't know if anyone listening to this or watching this, if they remember that, early on the Linux kernel was not in version control. It was just released as gzipped tar files, and you could download a big patch and apply it to the source tree you already downloaded. But patches, new things were submitted by email. And that continued for a very long time, even when many other projects were using CVS. That was really the only thing that we had. At some point, we got Subversion when CVS, people were getting frustrated. I can't remember some of the other. There were like a dozen that just sort of all blasted out around the same time that were going to quote unquote fix CVS, but none of them really addressed the fundamental problem of needing the ability to have distributed version control. And Linux first went into a product called BitKeeper, which was commercial, and that was, in my opinion, that was not a good move, but it did introduce developers to the concept of distributed version control. But then with, I mean, the story, how we got Git out of that, the need to, we're working this way. We need a tool because the license was going. I can't remember. The license was going away, or the company folded, or something like that.
I did a video on this a long time ago. I don't remember the exact story. They had, they had given they'd given kernel developers free access to it, and then they were switching their license or something. I don't. Yeah, it says the history on the Wikipedia page. Someone wants to go.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know exactly what it was.
There was some change like that, which basically forced the creation of Git.
Oh yeah. Also, there was some like drama where they didn't want people that were using BitKeeper to go work on Mercurial.
Yep, there was that, and a number of developers had they had reverse engineered the
protocol. Yeah.
And then was that who was that did that?
And
Well, I remember very famously that happened, and then the CEO of Bitmover, the company that made BitKeeper, revoked that kernel developer right, like that license, like revoked his right to use the tool.
Andrew Tridgell.
Yeah, Tridge. It was. That's who I thought it was. Yeah,
right. How did I forget? This is the Australian guy. Yeah, of course, it's the Australian guy. Why wouldn't it be an Australian guy?
Yeah.
We show up everywhere just doing random. You can't, we're a tiny little island. You can't. No one lives here, but we're involved in everything.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. We were talking about all the desktop environments, and we never once mentioned Enlightenment, which you know is still going. But yeah, yeah. So I don't know why I got on Git and SourceForge. I was talking about that.
Yes.
Like, yeah, we were talking about websites, and now it's like projects are. It's so easy to just get all that stuff sort of immediately when you set up a project. But that wasn't always the case. SourceForge was created to make that easier for people. But its implementation was rough. I mean, even from day one, it was like, I am not moving a project here. And then at one point, let's see, as in recent years, I say recent, maybe probably the past 10 years, but as it was being passed around by different companies, so they were just buying the property. One of the owners at some point, they were taking software that was on SourceForge for download, and then they were like adding like, I mean, malware. It was like they're adding like, here's some additional shareware that we're going to put in there. And yeah, it was garbage, but I mean, that was just the unraveling of it all. That happened, you know, after it was long since past the point of relevance, I think. But yeah, it was big for a while just because there wasn't anything like it, and then GitHub showed up, and you know, things like GitHub and GitLab and Codeberg, none of those things would exist without Git. So they even, you know, owe their success really to yet another thing that came out of Linux.
But the reason I brought up the site is you briefly mentioned at some point you didn't have an email until you got to university, and that's another thing which sort of is just taken for granted as well. This easy access to email provide you know, you don't have to go set up your own email server. You can just sign up for a thing and just have email now.
Exactly. Yeah, that was not the case. Email came with your ISP, and sometimes like they wanted to charge extra for email. So you're like, well, I don't need it, so I'm not I'm not going to pay for that. And also it was, you know, you would change ISPs, at least in the US, you would change ISPs frequently because the prices were all over the place. So you were always moving to whoever's the cheapest one this month. So you didn't want to keep changing an email address. So you just, you know, no one ever really bolted onto that. You still see some outliers. Like obviously we had America Online, which was its own sort of walled garden kind of thing. Funny that we're kind of moving back towards that. If we haven't already, but
you mentioned America Online. Did you know they're actually still operating as an ISP?
Yes, I do know that, which is wild to me. And people still use AOL.com email address.
Yep.
And you know, anytime I see one of those, or I see like Yahoo.com, my first question is, what company is running that? Because it cannot possibly be those companies are still running
Yahoo at this point. I want to say Microsoft owns Yahoo at this point.
I have no idea.
Who owns Yahoo? Nope, some private equity firm. 90% ownership by Apollo Global Management, and then which acquired and stake income, and Verizon owns the other 10%. Okay.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember when that all went down and they kind of split it up. But so So it's probably Verizon that's running the email.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is funny to see people using.
Yeah.
I'm like, I
feel the same way about a
people,
Hotmail address.
Yeah, Hotmail. Yeah, and I want to ask these people. I'm like, how do you possibly deal with that for email? Like, you can't get anything but spam on that address, right? Like, I mean,
oh, Hotmail's what I was thinking. Was that Microsoft owned? Yeah. Okay, they merged that into Outlook. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, you know what? I do remember that now. Hotmail. That was the one also where Microsoft acquired Hotmail, and Hotmail was running on FreeBSD. I think it was FreeBSD. It may have been another BSD, but it was all open source software. Was the backend, and they tried to move it all to Windows, and it failed. So they moved it back to the open source stuff. So I always thought that was kind of a funny story. But
so when you got started in Slackware, obviously this was well pre-Git. What was the development like back then? Like, was there a source control system of any sort? Was it just throwing patches out?
Yeah. So Slackware, we didn't have any version control system. We would maintain the distribution trees and kind of work in there, and then we used rsync a whole lot to move things around, and that was you would know what the master tree is, and you just it was sort of, and that's really the same way that like commercial software was handled before any kind of version control. You would have in companies, you would have a release engineer, basically, which was the person who was collecting all the correct copies of code and patches and putting it together in the release. That was all done by hand. But yeah, we didn't have anything. We would keep patches. So Slackware would gather the upstream source and then create patches against those releases, and that's what you see in the source tree in Slackware. And then at that point in time, there were various build scripts that were used for each package. I think they now try to make those a little more consistent. So every package, but the packages are built by a script that kind of drives the building and packaging process. And yeah, there was a lot of internal knowledge about how the packaging was done, and that was it was not all like in the scripts at that point. So you kind of had to know. We had notebooks that we would write down the steps and what to do. It's like, okay, well, after you build this, you've got to copy these two files over here and compress this and delete this because it's a temp file and stuff like that. And kind of the early days of Linux distributions, everyone was kind of figuring out how to build and package software for distribution. And the idea of software packages that we are inundated with in the world of Linux, that's not new. That's from commercial Unix. Like, that's how the parts of the OS were built and distributed to customers. So it was in a way, that idea was like a natural fit for a Linux distribution, because you were assembling it from various projects. So you would have a GCC package, and you would have this package, and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a nice way to organize it on a per project level that you were incorporating code from. But like Debian went through various iterations before they arrived at the format they use now, which I think the current Deb format was largely originated by Bruce Perrins, I think. Maybe I'm
not too sure on the format myself.
But the Debian package is pretty easy. It's an AR file.
Well, I mean, like the where the origin of came from.
But yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, but a Debian package contains it's an AR file. They may support other payload formats now, but it originated as an AR file, which, if you don't know AR, that is the archive command in the tool chain that you use to create static libraries. So an AR file puts all the object files there. So a Debian package is an AR file that contains two tarballs. One is data.tar. Pick your favorite compression format, and then control.tar. Compression format. And so the data package is, that gets extracted to the root file system, and then control contains the metadata and the scripts. And that format has been really flexible for them for a very long time. If you look at an RPM, which I spent a lot of time working on RPM related tools and libraries, and the RPM format is also one that has been with us for a long time, but is far more complicated than a Debian package. There's a lot of header metadata. Yeah. And Slackware, of course, just uses tar files, and those are extracted to the root file system as root, so permissions are correct. And that's a fine use of the tar format. There is metadata in a Slackware package. Like I think there's a package description in there, as well as a post-install script. I don't think Slackware, at least when I was involved, did not have like pre-install scripts or anything like that. It was just a single script that ran after the package was extracted, which in many cases, that's really all you need. And there was not a description. I think that got added later. But the biggest complaint when I was at Slackware, the biggest complaint that we got from packages is the lack of dependency metadata. So you would install, because there's none of that there, and the tools don't gather it from anywhere else. But people would install a package and then try to run it, and it would say, missing some shared library or whatever, and then they would say, I don't know what package that's in, because it's telling me it's missing lib whatever.so. And so I get that that's confusing, but with Slackware, just install all the packages, then you have everything. You've got it all there, and it doesn't really matter. It certainly doesn't matter now with storage space is much larger than we had back in the day.
Yeah, I have. What do I have in my? I actually don't even remember what I have in my system. Let's do an LSBLK. I have 2 terabytes there, 500 gigs there, another 2. So I have about like 4.5 terabytes in my system.
Yeah. So what are we talking about? Like saving here? Like why are people? Like what's a full install of any of these distributions now? It's
well, even with some of the larger ones, like Ubuntu ISO is 6.5 gig. No, sorry, 5.8 gigabytes. 5.8 gigabytes is the ISO.
Well, that's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff, but even so, it's 5.8 gigabytes.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't miss having that conversation with Slackware users. Why isn't there a dependency information? It was common. I'm sure it still comes up actually with them, but I don't know. It was you're like, how many times can I tell the same thing to people? But whatever. The other systems have their own problems too. With RPM, we've got, we have dependency information in there, but it was a long time before we got the overlay tool that's now called DNF that, is basically like apt to depackage, where, you say you want to install this package, it'll tell you all the other ones it needs as well. which is really that's the complete story there. It's one thing to embed dependency information in the package, and then it takes another tool to actually use it and do something useful with it. So that's what I think like apt did for Debian, and now DNF does for RPM. So yeah.
So Slackware has the title of being the oldest distribution still maintained. Obviously, it's not the first distro. It was based on SLS, and there are like 3 or 4 other things before Slackware.
Yep. Yeah.
So Slackware and Debian started about a month apart from each other.
Yeah.
And obviously Debian now is this, it was the basis for Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is this behemoth as well. Debian is this, this massive server distro, and Slackware's obviously still around, but it's kind of just there, just being maintained, like just sitting there. Like, what do you think? Sort of, you were there earlier. Like, what do you think sort of happened with that like shift between the two, where Debian has become this like critical infrastructure, and Slackware's still around, and it has its fans, but it's never really had that same level of adoption.
Yeah, I don't think anything's going to happen to Slackware, like, if that's what you're asking. Or
no, it's more like people. It's been around so long. There's always going to be someone who cares to keep it going, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I know, like, there are actually a lot of commercial installations of Slackware, believe it or not, and we had a lot of commercial users, but we weren't out there really pursuing it,
right?
Like Canonical does, or like Red Hat does, or SUSE does. And I think that Pat really wasn't that wasn't the thing that drove him to make Slackware, and he was not really interested in becoming that sort of business focused, we're going to go out and do whatever we need to do to secure these contracts or whatever. He was more like, look, this is the thing we're making.
Right.
If it works for you, I'm happy to have you use it, and we'll, help you with it. But it's my project. I put it together, and this is what I'm doing. And I think that's probably why you haven't seen it sort of really at the same level as say Debian, given that they were around the same time. Like Debian definitely, like Ian Murdoch, who created it, he definitely did go down the business path of finding the consumer sort of, or the commercial success paths. I mean, he founded Progeny Systems later on to sell commercial support for Debian. He brought people into the Debian fold that promoted its use in commercial settings, and really built sort of that community around it to keep it open and self-governing and things like that, which has given it this sort of inertia that I think has allowed these other things to build off of Debian and rely on it, knowing that's there. And we never really had anything set up like that for Slackware. We didn't have like a community of elected members making decisions and things like that. It was never set up for that. And I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's just, I think, different approaches to it. There have been a lot of commercial attempts at Debian, like I mentioned Progeny, but before that you had Corel. The Corel Corporation did Corel Linux, and that's actually why projects like Wine gained a lot of functionality. Is Corel was investing in the Windows compatibility layer. It's also why KDE got I don't know if you remember on well, certainly it appeared on Windows 95, but later versions would have the network neighborhood icon, and you could open it up and it would show you other Windows computers with shares. Okay, so that network neighborhood browsing, KDE gained that, and that was contributed by Corel.
Later known as My Network Places.
My Network Places, yeah. And that browse capability, that support for that, so it worked in the desktop. Corel did that. Of course, Corel Linux didn't really go anywhere. Progeny folded, and then and then the next one to come along was Canonical, and I was like, when I heard there was another commercial Debian that was coming out, I was like, really, guys, you're gonna try this again? And then it was, and I whatever the guy's name, Shuttleworth, was
Mark Shuttleworth,
sending out CDs. You just would ask for them, and it was like America Online in the 90s, where they were sending out CDs and floppy disks to everyone, and it was just, but there was no cost to it. And I was just like, okay, this is interesting, but what are you doing to make money? Like, how, like, what, like, you can give it away and have a bunch of users, but who's paying for this? And I remember he was talking, I think it was a DebConf, where people were asking them like what, like, what's the revenue stream here? And he just said, like, you don't have to worry about Canonical running out of money. And it was basically, he was saying, like, I'm just super rich and will always fund it. And I think someone said, like, yeah, but that's not a business plan.
It was basically the Silicon Valley business model for anyone else was doing it. It's burn money until you have market share.
Right. And I mean, and then once you have market share, then you can abuse the users and start extracting money from them. But I was just like, this, I mean, okay, fine. If this is what they want to do, cool. But it sounds like he just wants to do this project and surround himself with fans. And okay, that's cool. If I was a billionaire, maybe I would do that too. But I don't know. I guess out of that, there's a variant of Debian that people like, but I don't really know how closely Ubuntu works with Debian upstream. I know that they're based on Debian, but I don't know which direction contributions flow really. So yeah, I don't know. And then there's Suzo, which is kind of its own thing out here that has had peaks and valleys, and as the industry has evolved, never really gaining a huge amount of market share in comparison to the other distributions, but always sort of steady state. Like Suza initially was, it was going to be a German translation of Slackware that was only going to be sold in Europe, and then they kind of reinvented it. They hired a guy, Florian LaRoche, who had made Jurix, I think, and they kind of rebranded that as SUSE Linux, and then it started appearing in the US, but it was a different distribution entirely. And I remember using or looking at SUSE, what version was it? I remember it was an insane number of CDs. It was like 6 CDs of stuff, and it was just an enormous amount of software, and the installation process was so tedious. It was like wanted so many details. And then I got on the system, and this is just me, having used Slackware, having worked on that, now at Red Hat, familiar with those systems, and SUSE just really felt sort of like kind of clumsy at that time. It may be very different now, but I was just like, this system feels like a mess. It was, yeah, I didn't really. I don't know, and I don't know. Are you using SUSE? Or
I'm on Arch Linux right now.
Okay, yeah, yeah. It was different, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think that Slackware really had an interest in becoming a big commercial thing. They were, Pat was more interested in creating something that he liked to use that other people would use, and it has found lots of commercial use. It's just not, since there's nowhere to talk about that.
Right,
There's no
right.
like, we have the Red Hat Summit trade show. There's nothing like that for Slackware where
Sure.
those kinds of things can be talked about. But it's really cool actually that it's active still, and there are a lot of users, and it's quite interesting to me now in 2026. I still get questions about my time working on Slackware, so it definitely is a distribution that has an impact on new users. It's people just coming into the open source world, into the Linux world, and they find Slackware. I think it's still true that Slackware is probably one of the only distributions that's going to make you really become comfortable with the parts that make the OS. You really need to understand it. Whereas a system like Fedora or Ubuntu or Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we spend a lot of time really sort of papering over all of that kind of stuff to make a uniform experience. I mean, and there's good and bad, I see there's like Arch Linux.
Yeah, I'm on Arch right now. Yeah.
Arch, yeah, which I think is another one that is a good system to, if you really want to learn how a Linux system is put together. Arch is a good system for that. Used to be Gentoo was one that people would tell you to go, but I don't think that one does as good of a job really, because there's a lot. I think there's been a lot added to Gentoo to kind of make it uniform and Gentoo-y, so that it's not, you're learning the Gentoo way to do something as opposed to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they provide a lot of the Gentoo package manager. It provides its own specific way to configure the build options and things like that.
Right, yeah, and that is specific to Gentoo. That's not really a general Linux thing, which I think, if you want to learn, kind of what really goes on to put a system together, Slackware is a good place to start.
Just a bit of a side tangent with the whole Debian and Slackware stuff. People obviously know the naming of the Debian releases. I think a lot of people don't know why, and a big part of that was early on with the ties with Pixar, where you had the early mailing list hosted at Pixar. That's how. And so even from that earliest point of the distro, it already had some sort of, not it's funded by Pixar, but there's already a foot in the door in a corporate space.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that was I'm pretty sure that was Bruce Perens when he was working at Pixar, and that's where those names originated. Which, yeah, and definitely, he was certainly using it there and putting it to use
Mhm.
at Pixar, which is, you know, that's yeah, one one more leg up there for Debian.
Mhm. So I had to get to it eventually. You are technically a published author because
Oh,
you're on the Slackware book.
yes, yes, I am. Yes, that's right.
You mentioned obviously earlier that sort of books to inform people like how to use Linux were a really common thing back then. I'm assuming that's sort of the reason why that existed.
Yeah, it's um, I mean, yeah, you didn't have another, you didn't have a place to start, I guess. That was,
Mm.
you know, probably just to help you get going. Because if you're, you know, you're starting from nothing. Yeah, I mean the books, like well, okay, so you could have like different kinds of books, right? You could
Mm.
have like reference material. So if you're familiar with the subject, but if you're just starting out with it, you almost need like a guide,
Mm.
like a, you know, I'm going to take you through this stuff. So yeah, um that was kind of the objective with that Slackware book that we wrote, was, you know, let's not just put a book together that's all the man pages, you know,
Mm.
like a new user, they don't know what the ls command is, but
Right.
new users know that there are files, and how can I find my files, you know? So like that was kind of the approach we wanted to take um with it. But it was replacing a book that we had been including with Slackware that wasn't even written for Slackware. It was written more of as a generic Linux book, but I think it was being included with like in the box set that you could buy from Walnut Creek CD-ROM, because there wasn't another book, and it was roughly the appropriate weight and thickness to go in the product so that people felt like they were getting their money's worth. You know, like, because it wasn't like super thin, you know, but it also wasn't the one of those huge books where most people know that 90% of that's going to be just recycled garbage. It was
Right,
like,
right.
you know, it was that sweet spot. So they wanted us to have a book that was like that, but that was actually geared towards Slackware and usable, you know. Um, so yeah, that I'm technically a published author.
Along
I may
with
even have,
three other people, but
that's true. Yeah. So Chris was the main author on
Mhm.
that, and then Logan and I contributed other sections to it. Um, and we had to write that at the time. The sort of the up and coming, I guess, documentation, typesetting system, whatever, that was the new hotness at the time was
Mhm.
SGML.
Mm.
So the book was all marked up with that, and SGML had one major lacking um, thing. There was no way to generate an index. So we had to. So I'll say, okay. So the Walnut Creek was also having the FreeBSD
Mm.
team do a book as well. And so we were asking them, you know, and they're like, oh, you need to use SGML tools and all. Okay, great. And then we got to that, like, you know, we need to make an index now. And Walnut Creek CD-ROM was like, you got to make an index. And we're like, but there's not a way to kick one out. And they're like, you have to have an index. And so we went and we asked the FreeBSD guys, like, oh yeah, what'd you guys use to do an index? And they're like, oh, we just didn't do one. And you open the back of the book, and there wasn't an index there. So I was like, cool, that's great. So I think we had a conversation with them. It's like, well, the FreeBSD guys didn't do an index, so do we have to? And they're like, yeah, you have to. So okay. So then Logan and Chris, well, I think we all worked on it, but I forget who. We wrote some Perl code to generate an index, and it went through many iterations. And then we had put like, I remember we put things in the book so that we could like test to make sure that it was working right, things that would show up. And yeah, oh god, that was some late nights. But yeah, we got the index generated. Seemed to work. Of course, now you mention SGML and everyone's like, what? But yeah, Chris later on ended up redoing it all in LaTeX. So
a far more sensible choice.
Yeah, and looking back at it now, I'm not sure why we went. I'm pretty sure we went with SGML because that's what the company was kind of saying, like, use this. Right, but I mean, we had LaTeX and Slackware. That, in fact, that was one reason that a lot of people would go to Slackware. They were in education or whatever, and they needed to work with LaTeX, and they're like, you have it included, and it's all ready to go. So I'm going to use this. But yeah, we should have used that. We should have pushed back when I look back at it now.
We could probably just keep going for a long time, but one more thing I want to do before we sort of end off is there some like highlight from your long history doing this that you want to mention that maybe we haven't talked about just yet?
Oh gosh. Well, does it have to be Slackware specific or just
Red Hat's fine, whatever's interests you?
Well, okay. So one story that I like is a good friend of mine used to work at NASA at Johnson Space Center.
Okay.
And this was after my time at Slackware. By now I was working at Red Hat, and he worked at NASA for 7 years, and he worked on a couple of teams, but the first one that he worked on was the team that was responsible for maintaining the treadmill that's on the International Space Station. And there have been several iterations of the treadmill, and the one that he was working on, I forget what they called it. It doesn't matter. Now, the treadmill is a very complicated piece of equipment on the ISS. It has to float freely in space. It has to record vital statistics from the astronauts using it, and it also has to work. If it does not function and they can't get it repaired in a certain number of days, then they have to evac, because it's critical to prevent severe muscle atrophy.
Right.
So they have to work out on that thing a lot. And the thing had daily maintenance, weekly maintenance, monthly maintenance. Okay, well, he contacted me one day. He's like, "Hey man, I'm working on this like really like problem that's just ragging my brain here. I can't figure it out." And I'll add that he is an electrical engineer, and he's a software guy out of necessity, but that's kind of not what he focuses on primarily. So he was asking me a software question. He said, "Yeah, I'm working on the treadmill, and we have these data cards that come back. The astronauts bring them back, and they each have their own data card, and it records data for each time they use the treadmill." And so, it'll tell it's the vital stats, but then it's also like how long they used it, what, or did any of the sensors not work, all that kind of stuff. And so they would get these cards back, and they would dump the records, and they came back from some flight, and all of the cards were corrupted. They couldn't read anything. So they're like, we're kind of panicking, like it's the same with the backup treadmill, like they're all like broken, and I don't know what's going on. And so we went back and forth, and I'll set this up for you. So the ISS, is pretty old at this point, and the equipment that was going on it was built well before it launched, and the technology was certified to fly to space. And so my point here is you can't just take an iPad and take it to space. There's
Sure.
a whole process that NASA has to go through to clear things for flight. So I mentioned memory cards. The treadmill was not USB. The
Okay.
memory cards were PCM-CIA memory cards. And so PCM-CIA is a 16-bit bus that used to go in laptops for expansion cards. You could also have memory cards, and they had 4 MB memory cards that the astronauts would use. They would bring them back and they would dump them. What was happening is at this point in time, the ISS and this treadmill had been in use for a very long time. Missions were getting longer. And I worked with him and I said, okay, well, what does a data record look like? And he's telling me. So I wrote like a header file for that. And I said, okay, well, try this, dump, and what we found out is that records were there, but what was happening is that the treadmill, when it got to the end of the card, it just looped back around and kept writing. So on these long missions, it was just going back to the top and then writing down. And I said, okay, so you're going to have to dump this data. You're going to have, you could have like 2 corrupted records or 2 incomplete records, but the rest of the ones are there. It's just, we just have to seek until we find the beginning of a new record. And he's like, okay, I think I get it. And I said, you know what? I know what to do. And so I wrote a small command line program that would take one of the raw data files from the card and kind of recover every record that it could find. So, let's say it's supposed to have, 500 records, and it would throw out the 2 corrupted ones, and, you would have 498. So I slapped, LGPL on there and said, here you go, told him how to run it. And he's like, yeah, this is great. Yeah, I'm able to read all the cards. Thanks. This is super helpful. And I kind of explained what was going on because he wanted to be able to explain it to his team. And I was like, yeah, cool. That's neat. And months went by and I asked him about that. He's like, oh, yeah. So fun story about that. We developed a new procedure before astronauts return, or actually after astronauts use the treadmill, they are to take their memory card, float over to the return spacecraft, which has a ThinkPad in it, insert the memory card, and run your program to dump all the records to a text file and then clear the card for the next use.
Okay.
And that became part of the official use the treadmill procedure. I was like, wait, hold up. Are you saying I have software in space? I was like, yeah, you have software in space. And he's like, but don't get too excited because that treadmill is going to be retired. And then we have a new one coming out. I was like, it's still kind of cool. So I told people about it. Well, then skip ahead to when that treadmill is retired. I'm sharing this story in some bar and he's there. And I get to this point. I'm like, actually, come to think of it, whatever happened to the old treadmill and the ThinkPad with my software on it? And he's like, oh yeah, that was deorbited. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, when we sent the new one up, they bundled all the old treadmill stuff together, including the ThinkPad with your program on it, bundle it up, and then they push it out the ISS, and it falls back to Earth and it burns up in the atmosphere. And another friend of mine was like, that is the coolest story to like the end of software that I've ever heard. So I wrote an open source program. It was used in space, and then it was burned up in the atmosphere once it was done.
I can't think of a better story than that. That's a pretty high bar to clear.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. But yeah, that's my NASA claim to fame. Yes, I've had code in space and burned up in the atmosphere deliberately.
Okay.
Sorry if that was kind of long.
No, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. We need you to have a Wikipedia page now. Mark Shuttleworth, he's been to space, but he has not had his software launch back to Earth and
Yeah,
burnt
exactly, right? Yeah, feel free to start one. Yeah. It's probably bad form to start your own.
Probably. Probably.
Yeah. But I'm sure I have plenty more stories, but that's one of my favorites. Just because it's so common for us to write software that we open source and then we move on from. And years go by and people will ask you questions about stuff and you're like, well, it's really cool that you're using it, but man, I don't even use it anymore. I don't know how you want to take it over, and then they don't. So having a closure to an open source project is really kind of cool. And it involves space.
Yeah. That was actually again, I've not heard a story cooler than that. I don't know how I'm ever gonna have that one topped.
Well, yeah, I'm sure I have more, but
I need to find somebody who wrote something for the Mars rover. Maybe that'll top it.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Well, that's as good a place as any to end it.
Okay, well, thank you, and I hope this was useful. This was very fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, if you ever want to come back on and do another one, talk about, I don't know, maybe more focused on Red Hat or something like that. Yeah, I would.
Sure.
I'd love to do something, and it sounds like you have a lot more stories to talk about anyway. So
Yeah, you're around in this long enough. You have a lot of stories. I'm now thinking of some I didn't even get to for Slackware. So I don't know. Maybe we do a part 2 at some point.
okay,
You have more questions.
yeah. No, it was a lot of fun to talk. I enjoyed this. It was a really good episode, and I hope the viewers enjoyed it too.
Yes, hope so.
I'll do my sign off, and then we can end it. Unless do you have any like places you want to direct people to, or nothing?
No, I don't. I'm not promoting anything.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Check out Fedora. Yeah, do that.
Yes, get fedora.org. Yes.
I guess if this is your time to do the Red Hat marketing piece you really wanted to, go buy Red Hat license. Do that.
Tell your employer.
Yeah, tell your employer to buy Red Hat license.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do my outro and then we'll sign off.
Okay.
My main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. Sometimes I stream as well. I've got the gaming channel, Brody on Games. Right now I'm playing through Shenmue 2 and Metal Gear Solid. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see. When this comes out, maybe I'm done with one of those. You'll see. And I've got, if you're watching the video version of this, you can find the audio version on basically every podcast platform. On Spotify, we have video as well if you like Spotify video for some reason. I don't know why. We have an RSS feed, so if you like that, grab the RSS feed, and the video is on YouTube as well. I'll give you the final word. How do you want to sign us off?
Oh,
I never tell anyone they're doing it.
Oh, well, let's see. I think, keep exploring open source and keep submitting pull requests to your favorite projects.
Okay. Yeah, good way to end it.